what's given me a little bit of positivity or optimism is what we're seeing in regard to the labor activity in the country. So we had covered the threats of workers striking. We had Kaiser Permanente nurses threatening to strike, IATSE workers threatening to strike. IATSE, of course, is the union representing those in television and film. But the individuals who did end up striking are the John Deere workers. 10,000 of them decided to engage in this strike after they could not secure a contract that they were happy with. John Deere is making record profits to the tune of, I believe, $6 million in revenue last year. So it's pretty easy for them to share that wealth with the very people who help to generate it, which are the workers, but not under this system where they have a fiduciary responsibility to return, return investments to their shareholders. So with that said, I wanted to give an update real quick on, first of all, how exciting it is to see workers hold the line, but they're not doing it without support, right? There's protection in place. And a really good example of that is what John Deere did in regard to the workers' health insurance. In order to basically make these workers desperate to go back to work, John Deere decided to kick the striking workers off of their health care. But what I was happy to see is since they're represented by the United Auto Workers, which of course has a strike fund to the tune of $790 million, I believe, the union will be able to pay for the COBRA payments for these striking workers as the strike goes on. And by the way, John Deere has not striked, the workers have not striked since 1986, the year I was born. And so that strike lasted 5 months. This is an open-ended strike. We don't really know how long it's going to last. But what's really fascinating is to see how it's really hitting John Deere where it hurts, right? So there's this one division of John Deere. It's known as the money maker, where the equipment that they make, the machinery that they make, sells for about $8,000 a piece. I'm sorry, $800,000 a piece. And so they're already behind schedule considerably. And this was in the beginning of the strike. So John Deere is in a desperate situation. They think that they can, take the health insurance benefits away from the workers and make them desperate enough to end the strike. But since the workers have that added protection of the union representation and that strike fund that comes along with it, hopefully it'll be able to sustain them longer as they hold the line.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a phenomenal development. And the fact that people have been pummeled for so long, so many decades, but especially just like in the last 2 years in COVID, having to go through so much in the workplace, out of the workplace. And so, dealing with sickness in the workplace or not, it's phenomenal to see people fighting back and, people who are, who have any, any morality or any like decency, like, you should try to do something to help these workers. Like there's efforts that like the most minimum, like if you're posting on social media or something in solidarity, that consider that like the minimum. Like obviously what they're going to need is financial resources, because as economic resources, as she mentioned, like the last strike took over 5 months. That's probably more likely the case in a lot of these major strike actions, that it's not going to be, one and done. In fact, when you do see these like minor strikes that we are more accustomed to in the last few decades, these like, oh, we're going on strike for a day or two. It's like, it's all about a political statement, and it's not a real fight. In fact, it kind of just speaks to the weakness of the labor movement. Like when it's a real fight, it's going to be protracted, because the boss, like the fact that they have made all this profit in this time, and the fact that they have been hoarding it, means that they have a lot of cash to burn through, which means that the workers are probably going to be out on strike for a longer period of time. So whatever we can do to help that effort, we should. And the most likely outcome, unfortunately, has to be said, is that this is probably, hopefully it ends in victory, but like the more likely outcome is that it doesn't. And so we have to keep these things in mind, that like this is, if, hopefully this is the more optimistic view, that hopefully we're at the beginning of something that's percolating across the country of workers standing up and fighting back, and doing it not through individual measures, not through, leaning into nationalism or something, but going through collective action, through unions, through solidarity with their coworkers and non-coworkers, people who are fellow working people, that this is hopefully the beginning of something. And so we have to, keep that in mind, that, we support when we can, we should. And if it ends up in a loss, we just have to understand the massive fight we're in, the power of the corporations that we're up against.
Absolutely. And what also makes me optimistic was the fact that, you had this effort to unionize warehouse workers in Bessemer, Alabama. As we know, that effort did not succeed. And there was some concern that that would discourage workers, but it didn't. It didn't discourage workers. We're still seeing, honestly, labor activity that it's certainly not unprecedented. Like, we had a lot of labor activity early on in this country's history, early on in, like during the New Deal, lead up to the New Deal. But then everything just kind of started to die down. That wasn't an accident, as Nando did in a Decode segment months and months ago. You had actual policies being passed, like the Taft-Hartley Act, that very specifically wanted to undermine unions and create division within the workforce and all of that. But now you're seeing people with a level of class consciousness that didn't really exist in the 90s, I feel like, or if it did, it was really minimalized or minimized. And so I'm glad that people aren't discouraged. And I think it's because they don't really have the luxury of being discouraged, right? I think a lot of people are realizing, unless we fight back, unless we find ways to organize in other contexts, obviously John Deere is unionized, but unless we find ways to kind of shift the power dynamic in the workplace, things are just going to continue devolving for the worker. And that's certainly true with technology advancing, more and more automation. I didn't know that John Deere actually had a moratorium on closures, factory closures. And so that was one of the things that John Deere executives wanted to do away with in one of their contract offers. And the workers are like, no, we want to maintain that moratorium. And they've realized the importance of that. That means maintaining jobs for themselves and for their fellow coworkers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, you just have to keep in mind, I mean, like the way that the system as a whole, capitalism as a whole, it organizes the bosses and it disorganizes the workers. The fact that it's so much easier for a boss to say, I'm going to close down the plant for a week and you can't come in for a week. They can shut you out for a week. That week, their capitalists don't want to do that, but like they can probably withstand a week of no profits, whereas a week of no wages for a worker is so much harder to go through because capital is already organized and collectivized into like the firm, into the factory. And so the boss has all of these assets that go into that process. And like the fact that they can, like you're saying, I mean, they could typically, a boss could, if they have multiple locations, shut down one location, move it somewhere else. That's easy for them because, it's just, they're just moving property. They're just moving, it's not typically isn't what they want to do. There's usually circumstances that enable that process to happen, but workers can't just as easily get up and move to another state over where the job is going because they actually have a life. They actually have family and friends and they have limitations of like how they can break into a new social setting. And it's not easy to move into a new place, into a new part of the country, a new part of the world. So this is, the fact that, basically like what constitutes workers is like a part of us as people, the fact that we have to sell our ability to work versus the fact that a capitalist just owns a bunch of stuff that is profitable. That distinction, although it might be, maybe it's kind of, I'm being very general, but like that is fundamentally, like why capitalists will have the power they have and workers, relatively don't have as much power. But ultimately, I mean, this is like the only way to fight back is through collective action. That in order to push for their interests, workers have to organize collectively. That's the only way that you can meet the same level of power that the boss has. And one more thought, I guess, because sometimes or I've seen a little bit here already. I mean, you see this every so often. People's reaction to seeing a little bit of strike activity or to workers pushing back is to immediately jump to like, okay, general strike. Okay, this is good, but let's keep going. Make it bigger.
I'm happy you brought that up. So can you talk about that? Because I think, first of all, if there's anyone who's really well read on that issue, it would be you. And I was trying to talk about that and explain why it's not so easy on TYT. I believe it was this week. But can you discuss that? Because I think that there's like this tendency to think that you just call a general strike, and since the majority of Americans, the majority of workers agree on how the system is messed up, they're just going to do it. But it's far more complicated than that, and the groundwork requires quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first sobering thing is just the fact that in this country, in the private sector, it's only 6% of the workforce that's actually unionized.
Yep.
And so everything we're seeing in the news right now about Striketober, these are all union workers, meaning it's like a sliver of 6% of the population, of the working population, rather. And that doesn't diminish Striketober. That doesn't diminish what the workers are doing. Again, obviously, you should be doing what you can to support these efforts because we want them to win. But it's like important to just keep in mind that this is, the fact that it's, only John Deere out of like all of the kind of the bubbling work actions, John Deere the John Deere workers were the ones who actually went on strike. And that a lot of other workers are going to say, I would really rather not if we don't have to. That if like we can come to an agreement, that would be preferable, because while striking is perhaps the most powerful weapon workers have, it inevitably is also hurtful to them in the meantime, because they in fact are in capitalism. Like there's a society around you. Like it's you. In fact, the rules of capitalism say that you have to make your living on the market, that you have to buy and sell on the market. And if you don't have income for the time that you're striking, you cannot buy and sell on the market. That's the problem. It's not so easy to just like say, yeah, screw this whole thing. I'm going to just like, I'm just not going to go to work and like force the boss to give me what I want. It's like, there's so many preconditions. I talked about this a little bit last week, but there's so many preconditions that have to be met for workers to successfully organize and then go on strike, and then on top of that actually win. Like there's a lot of the history of the labor movement in this country and around the world is that, like, especially in neoliberalism, workers are going to lose more than they win, but like that's also been historically the case as well, that like the periods where workers win are exceptional, and we know them. Like in this country, it's the New Deal. In Europe, it starts a little bit earlier, extends a little bit later, but it's maybe like 50 years. We get like 20-30 in the US. The rest, like Europe, gets like maybe 50. So that's the exception, and the point is to try to recreate those situations, but you can't just will them into existence. It's not that the fact that workers won in the past was because they just wanted it enough. It was they did hard organizing, that the conditions were right for when it happened. And some of it is just kind of luck, that like, you just, sometimes you win, and sometimes someone, the boss says, yeah, fine, I'll concede to your demands. And sometimes the boss says, no, I'm going to hold out another week. And maybe that's what kills the strike. So there's just so many factors involved here. And again, speaks to the fact that like, if any of this is resonating with you, you should be doing what you can to support John Deere workers right now.
Yeah, there are people, sending them obviously like various resources, whether it's boxes of pizza, firewood, sending the United Auto Workers money to help with their strike fund. So there are things you can do even if you don't live in a state that has John Deere workers striking in it. So I highly recommend looking into that and supporting where you can. They can use all the support they can get.
If you enjoyed this video from Jacobin Weekends, please hit like and subscribe. That way, you'll enjoy all of our backlog, as well as all of our future content, including interviews, live streams, and clips. Thank you.